Okay. Good afternoon again, and welcome to the Integrated Lesson Plans webinar for the Virginia Alternate Assessment Program. We're pleased to have you this afternoon. We want to jump right in and give you a quick idea with some background first, but a quick idea of what we're going to be covering this afternoon. The significance of academic expectations for students with significant cognitive disabilities is important to us. The three elements that you see on the screen, academic standards, assessment, and instruction, it is very important that all of those are aligned. And we're providing you with some support today on the element of instruction is what we are hopeful for that you'll go away with today. And that will be aligned with the academic standards, which we'll talk about in a minute, and then also the assessment and then any assessments that you do in your own classroom. So with that said, just a quick review. If you're not aware, we do have Virginia Essentialized Standards of Learning, or we refer to them as the VESOL, that we use for the population of students with significant cognitive disabilities that participate in the Virginia Alternate Assessment Program. These standards are derived from the standards of learning, but they're reduced in depth, breadth, and complexity. And they were developed by Department of Education staff in partnership with staff from the Behavioral Research and Teaching at the University of Oregon. And also we had special educators from 27 different school divisions across the Commonwealth that assisted with this project, with the development of the VESOLs. So we have reading and math VESOLs in grades 3 through 8, and then in high school. And then we also have VESOL for science that we categorize them as grades 5, 8, and high school. But it's very important to realize that the grade 5 VESOL are intended to be taught in both grades 4 and grade 5. And in a similar fashion, the grade 8 VESOL are expected to be taught in grades 6, 7, and grade 8. It's just that the assessment is administered at grades 5, 8, and high school. So the VESOL are available on the VAP page on the Virginia Department of Education website. And then the purpose of today's webinar is to introduce all of you to a project that has been happening here over the last few months, really spearheaded by Donna Meeks and Michelle Gillio, related to what we're referring to as the VESOL Integrated Lesson Plans. So we'll be talking about the content of those lesson plans today. We'll give you information about how to access and use the lesson plans, and then let you know which lesson plans are already available and when more plans will be ready for you. So with that said, just a couple of logistics about the webinar. We are repeating this webinar tomorrow, September 8th at 9 a.m. It will be recorded, and both sessions will be recorded, and we'll be providing one of those sessions on the VAP page as a resource. So if your colleagues were not able to attend today's session, there's an opportunity tomorrow, and then also the recording will be available. There is a Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen, but if you could please hold your questions until later in the presentation. I think that many of your questions are going to be answered by Donna and Michelle as we go through this. Okay, and then just as a final statement, due to the number of participants in this session, certificates of participation will not be issued by the Department of Education. Okay, and with that said, I'm going to hand this over to Michelle.
Actually, you're going to hand it over to Donna.
I'm going to hand it over to Donna. Thank you, Donna.
That's quite all right. Thank you, Sarah. In 2021, as you all are aware, Virginia implemented a new multiple choice assessment in reading, math, and science for students with significant cognitive disabilities. We saw an immediate need for teachers of these students to have more instructional support. As a result, staff from the Office of Student Assessment and the Office of Instructional Services partnered to develop resources to provide for this need. We knew that experienced teachers could provide the best ideas for ways to create resources to support instruction. We had nearly 100 applicants, which really reinforced with us that you all also saw the need. The vast majority of the educators who were selected to work on this project are or have been teachers of students with significant cognitive disabilities. From the VDOE team, we have had these people involved throughout this process: Holly Cook, Michelle Gillio, Samantha Gregory, Deborah Johnson, Leah Mason, myself, Sharon Seiler, and Kristen Williams-Faust. In addition, we also partnered with Dr. Tamara Smith-Moyler from Old Dominion University as our TTAC representative, and with a school division representative, Dr. Erin Kirkland, who is a coordinator of special education in Winchester Public Schools. Educators from 38 school divisions throughout Virginia were selected to participate in this process. They include teachers from as far east as Accomack and Virginia Beach, to the west in Washington County, and they are as far north as Loudoun and Frederick counties, to Henry and Grayson counties in the south. We were so excited by the wide participation. So we want to talk to you a little bit about how these lesson plans were developed. We made a conscious decision to create a common template that would be used when all of the lessons were developed. The purpose of the common template was to make it easier for teachers to use any part or all parts of a lesson. It's available on the VDOE website, and I'm going to ask Michelle to share details of the template with you.
All right, so what's in this template? Well, it has descriptions of each of the components. It describes the order that the lesson should be presented in, and then it also has a lot of useful links. You may use this template to plan instruction, but by no means are we asking you to use it for all planning purposes. The next several slides, Don and I are going to go through this template and help you become familiar with all the components and the different links. The next slide is going to seem a little overwhelming, but we wanted to give you a big picture before breaking it apart. So here is the entire template, and as you can see, it has a lot of information. This template was used to create all of the lessons that you will be seeing on our website, and with little modification. I'll give you a minute to look over this slide. All right, so now let's jump into the different levels of the template. Notice at the top of the lesson, there's just some basic information, and then there's a table of links. The very first thing you'll see is the title. We encourage the developers to make it as catchy as possible so the students would be excited from the very beginning. Next, you'll see the grade level, content, reporting category, and lesson summary. To the best of their abilities, developers connected the primary subjects to another subject in an interactive activity. As we go through the template, continue to keep in mind that these lessons were created by many different teachers, specialists, and coaches, and they had their own unique style, so they're not all going to look the same. Let's take a look at the beginning of an actual lesson. Notice the catchy title, Make It Stick. Kind of makes you wonder what the story is all about in this lesson. This lesson targets VESOL M-5.3, and it is in the reporting category number sense, and computation estimation. It also contains integrated lessons in occupational therapy, reading, science, and history. So this lesson is really meaty. And the lesson summary is brief and gives an overview of the lesson. So in this lesson, students are going to be learning about place value, only looking at ones and tens place. All right, let's take a look at this table. This is one of my favorite parts of this whole lesson because it is a one-stop shop. You can get to anywhere in the lesson using the links that you see in this table. Another powerful thing about this is before you even look at the lesson, you can look at the resources that are available. In the next couple of slides, we're going to break down the table and essentially the template as well. So I'm going to send it back to Donna.
Thank you, Michelle. This is row 1 of that table. And as we said, the reason we created the template to be as it is so that you can look at any component of the lesson prior to making a decision about whether you want to use all of the lesson, whether you'd like to use a piece of the lesson, whether you'd like to just use the ideas from the lesson. But as I said, this is row 1. And we're going to break down row 1 by each of its components. The most important thing you as an educator can do is pay attention to what the VESOL and its complexity continuum actually say and the information that is presented. The first link on that row will take you to the VESOL and the complexity continuum. This math example is for lesson 5.3 or VESOL 5.3. And notice that the VESOL contains information about the content of the standard. The complexity continuum outlines the parameters for instruction. In this example, the VESOL is about place value. It includes multiples of 10, and the students will be focusing on 1's place and 10's place. The complexity continuum shows that students will work with numbers from 1 to 60, so they won't go all the way through 99, and that they may have to identify the digit or the value of the digit in the 1's place or the 10's place. Again, the most important components are that the VESOL itself provides information for the focus of the lesson, and the complexity continuum provides parameters for the scope of the content. It might be about numerical limits. It might be about the number of sentences that students should be exposed to. It could be about the operations used, but it gives a really good idea of the minimum and the maximum for the content. I'd like to take a look now at a science example. This science example is for Science VESOL 8.10. The yellow highlights point out the important parts of the VESOL. It's about animals and plants, their characteristics, and different functions of the parts. The blue portion reveals how the material will be presented, that students will have simple pictures, diagrams, or representations. And then the green portion tells you what the range could be. It might be everything from recognizing that animals and plants are different from common unrelated objects. As a middle of the road concept, it might be identifying different animal and plant behaviors and parts of those animals or plants. And then as a more advanced concept, it would be to identify the function of the parts of that animal or plant. For example, that an animal runs fast because they have long legs, or that they have big eyes to help them be able to see prey better. So it is important that teachers really focus in on what these VESOL and their complexity continuum are conveying. This is a reading example. In this reading example, the most important information that you will see is that this particular VESOL focuses on the main idea. It should only be about nonfiction text, and that it can be read to the student or that the student is able to read. You will have some students who can do some reading, and you'll have some students who are unable to read the content for themselves. Again, this particular content is about nonfiction the main idea of it. And then the range could be anywhere from 3 sentences with 5 to 7 words to a paragraph with 5 to 7 sentences. So as an educator, that gives you an idea of a range of different types of nonfiction texts that the students should be exposed to. The second area of the first row that you see is about functional skills. And this is the reason for the lesson. Why should students learn this concept? And the functional skills should explain how students will benefit from learning the content. It should connect to the students' lives as much as possible. Again, some of them will connect more directly to the students in your classrooms than others will. But that is the purpose of putting the functional skills in there. The next two we're going to talk about together, and that is assistive technology and materials. The materials section is a fairly easy one because that just allows you to click on that link and say, hey, what am I going to have to gather up in order to be able to do this lesson? And that often is a place that teachers like to start so that they can think ahead to what they have on hand, what they might want to look for or see if they can find, and what they could replace with something else. Right now, we're going to ask Samantha Gregory to hop on and talk a little bit more about assistive technology.
No, I don't think that she has made it on yet.
Oh, that's too bad.
I know, hopefully she'll come in later.
Yes, hopefully we'll be able to get Samantha to talk a little bit more. Oh,
on the phone.
Is she there?
Oh, I'm going to allow her to talk. Hey, Samantha.
I was gonna say, I'm here. I just don't have a button to unmute. Hi everyone. Yes, so assistive technology. With this, we really want to make sure that as our, teachers are looking at these lessons, that you really have some ideas about what some potential assistive technology tools might be needed for students to help them in their learning within this lesson. I think it's important to just kind of note that with assistive technology, it is very individualized to the individual. So any type of tool, device, technology that a student requires is assistive technology for that individual student. So this is not only these things are assistive technology that might be needed. But we hopefully have provided some different thoughts that as you're planning the lesson of things that you might think about that might be needed by the student based on their individual needs in order to be able to access and make progress in learning this content. A big piece of that too is that AAC, that augmentative and alternative communication. It's very challenging to know what our students do and don't know and are learning if they don't have a way to communicate with us. So we have, to the extent possible, tried to put some reminders in there about some different ways in which you might have students be able to communicate their knowledge to you, especially if they are nonverbal or require some alternate communication sources throughout the day. Is that kind of help?
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you so much. That is very helpful.
Of course. And I'm happy if other people have questions, throw them in, and I'm happy to help answer those.
Awesome. Thank you, Samantha.
Yeah.
So now we're ready to move on to row 2. And you see that there are 4 links in row 2. And we're going to begin with the first one, which is vocabulary. In the vocabulary section, many of the creators of these lesson plans included prior knowledge, which is vocabulary that students have been exposed to possibly in previous grade levels, or it might be information that they've been exposed to at a different point in the school year. And then there's also current vocabulary, and that is, what are the words that students will need to learn in order to be successful in this lesson? you will notice that some of these have a live link with them. And that live link will be used to take the teacher directly to word wall cards that have been developed. And these are literally 8x10 pieces of paper that you can either show on a screen or that you can print out and put on your wall to be a word wall that will assist students as they are learning this content. Please note that in this particular presentation, this is a screenshot of part of a lesson. So even though these are blue, they're not really live. I can't click on them during our presentation. The next section is about common misconceptions. I strongly recommend that as a teacher, you click on common misconceptions prior to ever starting this lesson, because the importance of the common misconceptions should highlight where students can easily get confused. It's intended to help you as the teacher think about errors that students may make when they're first learning the content, so that you can hopefully help them either get beyond those errors or maybe not even make them in the first place. The third link for this has to do with student-friendly outcomes. What should the student be able to convey that they're able to do once they have learned all the content? Are they able to count by tens? Are they able to tell you or to point out which numeral is in the ones place and which numeral is in the tens place on a 2-digit number? And are they able to tell you what those digits stand for? That a number in the ones place tells you that that's how many ones there are or how many units there are of it. And the number in the tens place is actually telling you how many tens of units are in that particular item. So on slides 30 and 31, the two I'm about to be talking about, I'm going to talk with you a little bit about the introductory activity. Most of the lessons contain an introductory activity that should help you as the teacher gauge where the student's level of understanding is and what their starting point for instruction may be. You may find that there are students who aren't quite ready to dive right into the lesson, and they need a little bit of background information. You may find students in your room who already have a decent understanding, so they may not need to go through all parts of a lesson or may not need as much instruction as some of your other students do. So the whole point of this introductory activity is to give you that starting point. And what you see on here is that this particular introductory activity starts with an I have, you have, I have, who has game, where the students are really just counting from 1 to 10. And then the second part of that is another I have, who has, where they're actually counting by tens from 10 to 100. So the craft sticks that are given out in this case will be numbers that are multiples of 10. So you're now talking about multiples of 10, which is part of the standard. And you're talking about, will the students recognize that they are the next multiple of 10 when you're counting out loud? So it gives you a warm-up activity. It gives you a way to start introducing the content. And it gives you a way of gauging who is ready and who maybe needs a little bit more assistance before they'll be ready to jump right into the lesson. At this point, I'm going to turn over links in row 3 and row 4 to Michelle.
All right, thanks, Donna. Let's talk about row 3. So as you see here, this is the meat of the lesson. This is where the plan for the instruction, differentiation, reflection, and formative assessment is housed. Up to this point, we've been pointing back to lesson 5.3, but there was so much meat in the lesson that it was hard to put it on this page. So we went back to the template. So you'll see just the description of what would be in those sections for when the lesson was developed. So let's look at those first two links. The plan for instruction and ways to differentiate the lesson. As you can see by the bullets, the part of the template details steps teachers and students will do on their way to learn the new skills. In each plan, teachers will find guiding questions and details on how to break the concepts. When the developers were creating these lessons, we continued to remind them that these lessons should be written so that any teacher, no matter what level they were, could break the concept down and support their students. The second link you see will take you to directions on how to differentiate the lesson. Again, we ask the developers, please make sure you go above the standard or, at a different rigor level, and then also bring it down below the standard so that teachers have a way to meet the needs of the students that are in their class. The last two links in this row are ways to assess understanding. Many times we think reflection is only for the students. However, you'll find that some of our lessons contain reflections for the teacher as well. Both students and teachers reflecting on information that is learned is really important to solidify the learning. The formative assessment link provides questions and activities you can use to assess the student's understanding throughout the lesson. You'll find some lessons contain ways to assess from the beginning, middle, and end, and then others might just contain a few questions. It all depends on the way the lesson was developed. Moving on to row 4. This is what I consider the fun part. This is where all of the meaty activities and the resources are housed. Notice in the second screenshot, so here's the first one up here. All of the links are live. And then you've got this one down here that doesn't have a live link right here. This indicates to the teacher that there is no supplemental materials. So in this lesson, there would be word wall cards, practice items, and integrated activity linked to the lesson, but there are no supplemental materials that go along with it. All right, so let's dig into these word wall cards. Donna kind of mentioned them a little bit earlier. These are resources that were created. The math ones were kind of modified from the ones that the instructional folks at the Department of Ed created, and we modified them to meet the VESOLs that our students would be working on. As the developers were creating their lessons, they started creating their own word wall cards in reading and science. So make sure you check out all of these wonderful resources that are in there. Supplemental materials. Many of our lessons have wonderful organizers and reading passages that the developers actually wrote themselves. You'll find worksheets and much, much more in there. I think Donna addressed this earlier in the presentation as well. So once VAP assessments were first implemented, practice items were created to use to support the new VESOLs. These practice items were written to mirror items students might see when they take the VAP assessment in the spring. As much as possible, the developers created, well, didn't create them, they took them from the website and added them to the lesson, the ones that pertain to the topics. If there aren't any in there, you can always look on the VAP webpage on the Virginia Department of Education website, and we'll be going there to that website a little later in the presentation. The last link in our table will take you to the integrated activity. Here you'll find a lesson or activity on how to connect the main lesson to a different subject or another content in the same content area. Most lessons contain an interactive, engaging activity, but if they don't, there will be no hyperlink associated with the section. Back to you, Donna.
So this is probably my favorite part of the lesson plans, because it provides an opportunity for students to really reinforce skills that they're learning and content that they're learning in a way that allows them to be able to connect those content areas to each other. The particular example that I'm going to share with you even included an opportunity for the occupational therapist to be able to come in and work with those students who have fine motor deficits. If the therapist can't come in at that time, the lesson is still very doable with the students. But it's a great opportunity for the occupational therapist to be in the room rather than pulling a student out or working with them on something entirely separate. They can be part of the content, part of the instruction, and part of what the student is actually working on. Now, I'm going to read this to you. This is a story that this particular developer made up. And it says, one very sunny day in the week before Halloween, John and Hunter wanted to count the seeds in their orange pumpkin. They asked their mom for help when cutting it open. As they scooped out the seeds and laid them out, Hunter started counting the seeds one by one. John stopped him and said, "I know a better way. My teacher taught me that grouping items in groups of 10 makes it easier to count large numbers." So they counted the seeds and placed them in groups of 10 until they didn't have enough to make a 10. Then they started counting 10, 20, 30, 40, until all the seeds had been counted. They were shocked to learn they had 57 seeds in their pumpkin. So what this developer did was she created some reading questions that will help with understanding the student's level of reading comprehension. Are they paying attention? Are they picking up on details? She could put that actual story up on a whiteboard or project it and actually have the students point out the answers to the questions. How do you know that the correct answer is the day before Halloween to question number 1? So they've included questions that can be used, and I know you'll come up with many more of your own. These are the reading questions. Then there's also a set of math questions. The first math question may seem like it's more of a reading comprehension question, but then you'll notice that once the question has been asked about how many seeds did they count, then questions 2 and 3 and 4 relate back to question 1. So being able to answer questions 2, 3, and 4 is dependent on the students remembering how many seeds John and Hunter counted. And then as a science connection, if you have taught anything about plant life cycles or about energy, these might be really great questions to ask. Which is first in a pumpkin's life cycle, a vine or a seed? What does a pumpkin need to grow? Is sun considered a source of sound energy or heat energy? And if you've taken a look at the grade 5 science VESOL, you'll see that there are connections to each one of those questions back to a specific VESOL.
All right, so now that we have looked at the lesson template, looked at a lesson, let's talk about where to find these lessons. I'm going to navigate away from the presentation for just a few moments so that I can direct you to where these wonderful resources are. So I'm going to go to the homepage for the Virginia Department of Education, and you'll see these hyperlinks up here. I'm sure most of you have already been here. I'm going to hover over Teaching, Learning, and Assessment. And our resources are kind of hidden, so we have to look for them all the way over here in the Student Assessment drop down here. And I'm going to come down to the Virginia Alternate Assessment Program, and I'm going to click on this hyperlink. This directs me to the VAP webpage. And here, if you've not ever been here, has amazing resources for teachers, parents, and students. Just a plethora of information for you to use. But we're going to focus right here on this yellow radio button here. It says Sample Integrated Lesson Plans for VESOL, and that's where all of our lessons are going to be housed. So I'm going to click on that button, and it takes us to another page, and it says Sample Integrated Lesson Plans for Virginia Essentialized Standards of Learning. We've already talked about a lot of this information up here in this presentation. And this is where you're going to find the template. And again, this is just a tool for you to use. You do not have to use it on a regular basis unless you choose to use it. We've talked about the word wall cards, and when they are finalized, we're hoping to get them up sometime soon, and they'll be housed on this page as well. So as I scroll down, you'll see that the page is broken up. Over here on this side is math and reading per grade level. And then you come over here in 8th grade, high school math and reading, and then science is by itself. These hyperlinks will take you to a location lower in the page. They still stay on the same page. So since our lesson was in 5th grade, I'm going to select this hyperlink and I'm going to jump down to that section of the web page. And here you'll see that math is on the left-hand side and reading's on the right-hand side. And you'll see these 2 hyperlinks here. These are the 2 lessons that we have available at this moment. And this one right here is the one that we showcased today. At this time, they're just in Word format. I think we are eventually going to put them as PDF as well, so people that have Chromebooks or don't have Word can access them easier as well. As we get more lessons, we will continue to add to this page. So we would suggest that maybe on Mondays, come and look at the page to see what exciting lessons have been added. I'm going to scroll all the way down to the bottom just to show you what science looks like. So science is broken into 3 columns, and we have 5th grade, 8th grade, and high school here. Let's go back to our presentation. We've talked about that. We've talked about that. And then again, here's the template. If you do want to use it, make sure you download it and copy it to your computer. So in the process, we've had a few questions that have popped up on a regular basis. First one is, do the teachers have to use the lesson plans? And I think through this presentation, you've gotten the idea that no, these are just a tool for you to use. We would love for you to use them. We would love for you to tell your friends and counterparts. And I think your regular ed teachers are going to be a little jealous of some of these lessons because they are that dynamic. You can use them in one full sweep. You can use them in different parts, or just pick things out like the common misconceptions, or you just want to use the introductory activity. Another question we've gotten is, can a lesson be used with students at different grade levels? And our philosophy is, you know your students best, and these lessons were created with flexibility. And take a look at all the different lessons, and maybe a 4th grade lesson might work for your 3rd graders or your 8th graders. It just all depends on where your students are. And I think we are back to Sarah.
All right. Thank you, Michelle. And thank you, Donna. Thanks for the information and the great resources. And one of the most frequent questions we've had this afternoon is, there's definitely a lot of interest in the resources as lesson plans, but there is also interest in receiving a copy of this PowerPoint. So we will be attempting to mail it out by email to the registered participants, but I do want to add that sometimes when we're sending an attachment like this and to this number of people, it doesn't always make it. It will be posted on the VAP webpage as well. So you'll have an opportunity to access that.
Michelle, one of the questions we just received was whether you are able to go back to our website and show again where the template is linked.
Absolutely. All right, so I am on the page for sample integrated lessons, and it's at the very top.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, Michelle, how did you get to that sample integrated lesson plan page? Can you show that one too?
Sure. I'll go all the way back. So you start at the home page, and I'm coming to teaching, learning, and assessment. I'm going to come back over here to student assessment and come all the way down to Virginia Alternative Assessment Program right here. I'm going to click on that. And that's going to take me to the VAP page. And then I'm going to scroll down just slightly, and then there's the radio button right in the center.
Awesome. Thanks, Michelle.
You're welcome.
And it's important to note that this information is going to be publicly available. It doesn't require a login to get to it. So it is available to you. And a very important point that Donna and Michelle mentioned is that there will be additional lessons added as they are completed by the developers. So definitely check back frequently for new lesson plans. Okay. Well, with that said, I'm going to go ahead and we'll stop the recording